Back on the Exit 52 podcast presented by Jimmy Seafood with MASN's finest, Paul Mancano. Paul, thanks for joining the show, man.
Yeah,
First
thanks.
of all, what do you make of this last week of Orioles baseball? We'll just start right there.
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say MASN's finest. That's got to go to anybody but me. Probably Rocky Bacco, then Steve Molesky, then about 80 people. This last week has been among the most fun I've had since I started at MASN back in 2016. I mean, this has been an absolute blast. I haven't gotten to see too much extended winning. I got a little bit when I started, but over the last week, I mean, it has been easily the most fun of the last, of the Mike Elias era, the Brandon Hyde era. It's been an absolute blast just watching this team play on a night in, night out basis.
There seems to be a very easy answer about like when the turnaround kind of happened and what all went into it. But is there like one moment in your mind or one thing that you saw during a game or covering a game or, something like that where you went like, holy crap, like this may be a different year. You're, like maybe this is turning, the tides are turning for the good. And like, maybe we are seeing, some of this good and this plan start to come to life.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, the elephant in the room is Adley Rutschman. I mean, he is definitely the way that his kind of energy and attitude has infected in a good way this ball club, I think is an easy answer there. But I think that road trip where they split, they went up to Boston and New York, I think, and they ended up coming out of that with a 500 road trip. And it felt like a small victory because this team, let's be honest, has not performed well over the last 3 years in Fenway or in Yankee Stadium. They just have not been in competitive games. And the fact that they were in so many games through May and June, not just winning games, but the games that they lost were by 1 or 2 runs instead of by 6 or 7 runs, like we've seen over the past few years. It just felt different. And you saw the quote from Trey Mancini a couple of weeks ago where he said, "We come to the ballpark expecting to win every day." And that's something that we haven't felt over the last few years. So the players notice it. And yes, I think, like you said, Adley is an easy answer there, but it's more than just Adley at this point. It's clearly a team-wide attitude that they have.
It's funny too, because you and Trey kind of have that same like career lifespan with the Orioles. Like Trey came up, at the end of, I think it was 2016, right? 2016. I know he was on the wild card roster. And yeah, so you guys have kind of had that. You had a little bit of success there, and then it got absolutely just ripped away. And we saw that window just slammed shut right in our faces before we even realized it. And yeah, now it seems like it's kind of not coming full circle, but again, we're kind of reaping the rewards of this whole rebuild. It's nice to see it finally come together.
Yeah, I mean, Trey Mancini has been fun to watch him personally go through the kind of growth that he has over the last several years. This guy's been through everything under the sun. I think of when really the Elias Hyde era began, and all the questions every single time in the clubhouse in spring training was, it's like going from a rookie guy who finished near the top of the American League Rookie of the Year standings to leader of the club. And he kept saying, life comes at you fast. And that's how it was for him at the time. And he embraced it wholeheartedly, and he had the production to back it up. So what a fun journey it's been watching him and other guys on this team. I mean, I think of Austin Hayes and some of the guys who Hayes, remember, debuted back in 2017 as coming all the way up from Double-A and was really not the same guy that he is now, but he showed flashes of it. You see Anthony Santander, the Rule 5 draft pick. So you're seeing these guys go through the maturation process. I think from the outside, probably the national media looks at this Orioles team and says, well, it's Adley Rutschman. It's new guys like Jorge Mateo and, Kyle Bradish or something like that. And they're forgetting that we're also seeing a ton of internal improvements from guys who have been here, and they're finally starting to cash in on the potential that we've seen from them.
The Trey Mancini one is so interesting because his whole narrative over the last, I guess, couple of weeks has been club leader, but now there's just an entire chamber of discussion about whether he should be traded, whether he shouldn't be traded. I couldn't be more against him being traded. I think that, and I think you summed it up very well, Paul, in terms of there's like a winning mentality and a culture that's clearly being developed right now. And while you can play sports in a vacuum, like sports are not played in a vacuum. And when a clubhouse is all moving in the right direction, that means something, as opposed to getting like B minus prospects, whatever it is. You've got a background in terms of sort of following a lot of that minor league type of stuff. Do you feel like a Trey Mancini trade makes sense in terms of continuing to build organizational depth, or should they ride some of it out, specifically with him? And how do you feel about those other guys, your Jorge Lopez's, your, different guys who they could deal?
I think you put it well, where it's very difficult to separate the emotional side, the fan side, from the on-field production, because Trey has been the heart and soul of this team for the last several years. He has been the guy who has played almost every day, except for the year he missed with stage 3 colon cancer. He has been the guy that Brandon Hyde has gone to be a leader of this team. And it's very different from just looking at stats on a page and saying he's worth X amount in arbitration and he's worth X amount in terms of WAR. So it's a very difficult conversation to have. And I think that while on the field, it makes so much sense, because you look at Ryan Mountcastle, who's not only locking down first base defensively this year, but we know what he can do offensively as well. And you have so many guys who are coming up through the system, with Kyle Stowers, who is going to be a corner outfielder DH type. You already have Anthony Santander, who's a corner outfielder DH type. You're going to have your Heston Kjerstads. You're going to have your guys coming up, in theory, like Colton Cowser, who are going to fill that corner outfield, which Trey Mancini has played more of this year, and DH. And there's just really not going to be a spot for him going forward. And considering he's one of the older guys in this team at 30 years old, it's very tough to see a spot for him going forward long term, especially considering his contract situation. So I think the question becomes, do you ride it out with him through these last few months and kind of let him experience that winning and let him contribute to a team that hopefully is around 500 by the end of the season? Or do you, try to cash in on his, couple months of Trey Mancini now? And I think that that's a question that certainly Mike Elias is grappling with. However, I will say it's one of those situations where we've seen teams do this in the past. I think of back in 2006, the Phillies trading Bobby Abreu, a guy who was very productive, very good on the team, but there wasn't a spot for him. And a guy who was, now after retirement is on Hall of Fame ballots, an excellent career for Bobby Abreu, but the team was getting better and they were turning over a younger roster, and it ended up being the right move. So I think there are examples throughout recent baseball history, of sometimes when a guy just doesn't quite fit the roster in terms of position, and them having to make a trade to move on from him. It can be very tough to stomach, especially as a fan, but ultimately you kind of have to just at some point, I believe, trust that, the Orioles kind of know what they're doing and have a long-term plan for this thing.
Real quick, Bobby Abreu feels like the perfect guy that should have been an Oriole when he was like 41 years old. And just never, like he screams, "I'm going to be an Oriole" with Derek Lee and Sammy.
David Segui.
Yeah.
Jim Thome.
Jim Thome, yeah.
He could have been on, he should have been on that 2012 team with Randy Wolf and Joe Saunders and Thome.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yes.
That just makes sense. When you said that just clicked to me. Another guy that, again, has been mentioned, he was talked about all over The Athletic today, is Santander. And again, you talked about him. His story has been fantastic too. They took him in the Rule 5 draft. I think he was out that whole next year with the shoulder surgery. I don't think it ever played above like A ball, and has turned into like quietly. I mean, he was the 2019, Oriole MVP. He was a very good player. He's another guy whose name has been floated out there. And again, you mentioned some of the guys, Cowser, Stowers, those guys, they're going to be the corner outfielders for the future. Is he a guy who are you going to be shocked on August 3rd if Santander is still in an Oriole uniform?
I wouldn't be shocked either way, to be honest, because I think there have been ample times over the last couple of years where it has been feasible that the Orioles do trade Anthony Santander, and it just hasn't come to fruition because of the talent that you talk about coming up through the system. I mean, who knows if the Orioles take with the number 1 overall pick another outfielder, and you're talking about maybe the most loaded farm system in baseball, and their deepest position is outfield because of all the draft equity that they've put into that position over the last few years. And not just that, but the guys who are close to the bigs, like a Kyle Stowers, who we've already seen has made his debut. So I think it has made sense in the past, and yet Mike Elias has not pulled the trigger on it. And I think because he's waiting for the right amount, I think he knows that Anthony Santander has value. And we've seen in the past, he's not going to just deal a guy. I think of last year when you had Tanner Scott and Paul Fry, both on the trading block around the trade deadline. And he didn't pull the trigger on either of those guys because he wanted to make sure that he got ample return. It wasn't just, I'm trading this guy because he's, we need to open up a roster spot for somebody younger. So I think Santander fits into a similar category where he still is very productive. I mean, this lineup is not the same without Anthony Santander right now. And maybe Kyle Stowers can fill that void. Maybe a Colton Cowser in a year or two can be just as good as, or not, if not better than Anthony Santander. But Santander has been very productive in this lineup. He is driving in a ton of runs. He's drawing a lot more walks than he has in previous years. So to just remove him for if you were to take 80 cents, 90 cents on the dollar, I don't think Mike Elias wants to do that, because you don't want to lose a trade that you don't have to, just because you want to see guys come up and debut. You have to sit tight and understand that this guy has value. And unless you're offering the right amount, I'm not going to just trade him just to trade him, because he is actually valuable to our team right now. So I wouldn't be shocked either way. And I think it just is going to come down to, does Mike Elias feel like he's getting a fair return for Anthony Santander, who is still a young, very productive player?
Where do you see the Orioles going with the number 1 pick at this point?
It's a great question. I probably flip-flop back and forth every other day. I wake up thinking one thing and I go to bed thinking another. I don't think they've made up their mind quite yet. They obviously have not given us any hints one way or the other. Mike Elias has been tight-lipped throughout his entire tenure about not just the number 1 overall pick, but every pick that he makes. I think I think he was, being straightforward when he said that it's down to 5, maybe 6 guys. And I think we all know pretty much who those are. It's the 4 high school guys with 1 college player in Brooks Lee. Probably, maybe you could say a Cam Collier or a Jacob Berry is your 6th player in that group. But it's going to be one of those top guys, whether it's Jackson Holiday, Elijah Green, Drew Jones, or Tamar Johnson, are probably those 4. And then you add the 5th in Brooks Lee. So it's going to be one of those players. Who it is, I think, is anybody's guess. And Elias has said in 2019, it was really down to 3 players. And I think we know, obviously, Bobby Witt and Adley were the 2 guys in that group. Now it seems kind of wide open. And I don't think any one of these guys, I'm sure they have a ranking of who they like the most. But right now, I don't know if any one of those guys is in a tier by himself. I think some draft experts would say Drew Jones is. But right now, given how good Tamar Johnson has looked at the plate, given how high of a ceiling Elijah Green has, given the safety of a Brooks Lee, I don't think there's any one guy who has separated himself that much from the pack to the point where the Orioles have made up their mind yet. I think they're taking everything into consideration, and this might come down to the wire in terms of who they decide to go with.
I was going to say, so this seems like it will be coming down to the phone calls made on draft afternoon, draft night. As we know, it's a Sunday at 7:00, prime time for the first round of a draft. It's another great job, MLB.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I mean, I've gone over the names a bunch of times, and it's just like, again, it kind of comes down to the money thing. And obviously they have the 2nd most bonus allotment in history. I don't know if you know who had the 1st most. It was the Astros in 2015 with Mike Elias. So go figure that. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting class. And I was reading, they were like, if there's a draft where it would be understandable to go under slot at 1, it's probably this one, because like you said, while there are some good players, the Drew Jones and that, like, there's no one person that is like, you have to take this. This is a can't miss prospect. So yeah, it seems like this is going to come down to the wire, and you guys better have all your video packages ready to go.
Oh yeah.
I'll have to have all my blogs ready to go.
Yeah.
By 7:00 on Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, there's been Tim Leonard, who's been heading up our draft coverage, has been interviewing just about everybody he possibly can. I mean, in order to make sure that all our bases are covered, because I remember back in 2019, Eric, when you were talking about, you went into the day and there were rumors about them not taking Adley and them going with somebody way off the board. And it just felt like Michael, the first draft number 1 overall pick that Michael Elias is going to have, he can't screw this up. He has to go with the slam dunk and Adley. And it's just not that way. I know people have their preferences, but it's kind of like pick your flavor this year, because you have an outstanding hitter, but not a great defensive player in Termarr Johnson. You have the proven college guy in Brooks Lee. You have the incredibly high ceiling, great athlete in Elijah Green. It's very different in terms of what these 5 guys, maybe 6, bring to the table. So it really just going to come down to preference, I think, at this point. So, I'm sure Elias has his favorites, like I said, but I don't know if he's got one guy in a tier by himself and they're just, already waiting to make the call.
It's super interesting too, because with obviously 3 top 5 picks, he's gone college bat each time.
Yes.
So now does he go college bat again to make that player sort of on the same, I guess, winning timeline as these guys sort of above him, a more proven guy you can get to the bigs faster? That to me is interesting, because that just feels like his philosophy is to go college bat in the spot, pay them an under slot value, and then go after, high school guys later in the draft. But you're right. It's super interesting. Normally, you go through the draft stuff and there becomes sort of an emergence of a number 1 guy. And I guess Drew Jones has just kind of become the guy that sits on top of all the draft lists you read, and then you read them and it's like, well, he's the number 1 guy, but like, who knows? So he's just sort of sitting there by default.
Yeah.
So that's what's fascinating to me is there's not really the standout college. Brooks Lee, and they're not going to pick Kevin Pareda from Georgia Tech as a catcher, but like there's those guys that are maybe there, Jace Jung, whatever. None of those guys are like in the top. Like those 4 high school guys have kind of become the consensus top 4 to a certain extent.
Yeah, and I think if the Orioles had the number 3 or number 4 pick in this draft, I honestly think Brooks Lee would be the pick, because I think that at that point, you're talking about a Heston Kjerstad number 2 overall going under slot, a Colton Cowser going number 5 overall and under slot. So I think it would fit that mold. But the fact that they have the number 1 pick makes me think that they don't want to pass on who they think is the best talent at this position. And that we've seen that model, them go with college over the last 3 years, but going back to his days in Houston when he was the assistant GM there, they did take high school guys. Carlos Correa was a high school player, and then he ended up signing for under slot. So maybe there's a high school guy that is going to be the big thing here. The big question mark is money. And it's just something that we don't have access to and we don't have knowledge of, but what is the specific dollar amount that each of these guys is looking for? And that is going to determine a lot in terms of who the Orioles want to go with, because it's all it all factors in. If the Orioles go under slot at 1, maybe they have a better chance to go over slot at 33 or 67 or 81. They have so many picks in the first couple of days of this draft. And if they go closer to the slot value, maybe Drew Jones wants close to, or he wants over slot at number 1. Maybe they're just too tempted by that. And they say, well, we'll just have to find an under slot guy later on in this draft. So it's going to come down to a lot of it's going to come down to how much these guys are willing to command at this point. And I think to your point about college players, I think what Mike Elias in this front office loves about college players is how safe they are, because you knew when you're getting Colton Cowser, no, he may not have the ceiling that some of these high school bats got last year, but he certainly has a very high floor because he's got several years sample size at Sam Houston State where we've had eyes on him. He's played up against competition that we know is not just some random high school guys. High school just offers a level of unpredictability. You don't have as much statistical data. You don't have as many sensors in the ballparks like you do with NCAA baseball. So college offers a much more advanced approach, and it gives you so much more information. And you're having an extra 3 years potentially of sample size, of stats, of data to look at these guys. So I think that's why we've seen Elias in the front office lean more towards college guys, because they know what they're getting in those guys. And high school guys just have this vast level of unpredictability.
You're talking again about the high school pitcher or high school batters versus the college batters and what a safe, the safe haven the college guys are. Pitchers are just a different animal in their own.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, and it was, I was not shocked, but I was kind of surprised when Elias straight up came out and was like, we're not even looking at any pitcher, like very early. And again, it seems like a lot of the top guys have either had Tommy John or they're hurt, stuff like that. So where do you think, again, you mentioned some of their picks, they have 6 of the top 110. Where do you think they start kind of trying to, like, all right, at 33, can they get one of the top guys who again is injured and who would have been a top guy if not for the surgery or injury or whatever. Where do you think they're trying to kind of pick their spot to get a pitcher? Because it seems like they like going, again, like college bat, under slot or over slot high school bat, and then like pitcher.
Yeah.
That's kind of seems to be Elias's his pattern.
Yeah, I think with all this stuff, all we have to go by is their draft history, because Elias is not going to give us any kind of insight. So going by their draft history, I look back at, like you said, the last couple drafts, and last year was incredibly puzzling at first before you got the full picture of the draft. The fact that they waited until the 5th round to take their first pitcher, they took Carlos Tavera, and then they waited 5 more rounds, and then they went on this crazy run of pitchers on the last day of the draft, was one of the strangest ways to formulate a draft board, but it was fascinating. And I think it made a lot more sense the further away I got from it. The one example that I do have of Mike Elias from his Houston days that I think of is the draft in which they went under slot at 1. And I believe it was the Carlos Correa draft, and then took Lance McCullers later on in I think it was the early 30s of that draft, the 2nd round essentially pick that they had. And they went way over slot for Lance McCullers, and they paid him $2.5 million. Everybody else around that time in the draft was getting $500,000 or something around that realm. So he's done it in the past, and it worked for the most part. I mean, I think McCullers has had injuries, but that's been a pretty solid pick, I think you could say. So he's not afraid to do it. But I thought if there was any opportunity for Elias to do that kind of under slot position player 1, way over slot high school pitcher at 33 or 32, wherever it was, I thought it was going to be 2020 when he went with Heston Kjerstad, who we knew was going to be an underslot guy. And then they didn't do it. And they went with another underslot guy in Jordan Westberg at 30. That has worked out incredibly well so far. And it wasn't until the 4th round where they went over slot with Kobe Mayo, a high school position player. So I think anything is on the table at this point. I wouldn't be shocked if they go with a pitcher at 33. I just don't know who's going to be available at that point, because from all the draft consensus that I've gotten, it's that the first 10 picks are going to be dominated by position players, and the first 30 or so vast majority is going to be position players over pitchers. And when it gets to 33 is the guy that they want on the board at that point. And are they willing to go over slot? And I think that they could go any number of ways, especially because they have 4 picks on day 1 of this draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting to have no real top line pitchers slated to be in the top 10. Like, that seems super rare. Like, even just following college baseball, there is not like a dominant college starter. Like, I'm looking Keith Law's just top 100 just to sort of look at it as I've looked through stuff the whole week. And Adam Mazur from Iowa was the Big Ten pitcher of the year. I watched him pitch the Big Ten tournament. Like, doesn't scream first round pick, at least just like from watching one start. So it's amazing to me that a guy like that is that high. No disrespect to Mr. Mazur, who was obviously good, but there's just not the, like, even watching a lot of the College World Series and things like that, there weren't the top line college pitchers this year. And you don't have even some of those intriguing high school arms. So it's just fascinating for me to look at all of these rankings and see so many position players like in the top 30 or 40. It
is weird. And it's weird that Elias, who keeps all options on the table, at least publicly, would rule out a pitcher. That goes to show you that he's willing to rule something out, that it means that there is a 0.0% chance that they take a pitcher at 1, because that is just the gap between the position players and the pitchers. Usually he will keep all options on the table, like last year I think of, and he says, well, if there's a pitcher that we really like, we'll go ahead and take that guy, even though we knew that there was maybe a 1% chance they'd take a pitcher. There's a 0.0% chance that they're taking a pitcher number 1. And I would say there's a very, very, very slim chance that the pitcher goes in the top 5. So it's a very strange draft in terms of the pitcher talent at the top, because it is dominated by position players.
The pitcher conversation's an interesting one for sure. And I'd like to kind of talk on that on a more macro level as it relates to the Orioles. It's definitely a philosophical thing with Elias. And I've seen other GMs, especially in the modern age, kind of follow this blueprint, which is accumulate as many bats, usually college bats, as much as you can, get yourself close to a contention window, and then, what's the next step to augment this roster with more pitching? We do have pitchers in the pipeline here, but at a certain point, you got to think that they're going to go out and acquire, whether it be through trade, through free agency, a starting pitcher or two to kind of augment the roster. And then, where do you see Elias kind of stepping on the gas with that, and through what method, and what do you foresee on that front?
It is difficult to say at this point because we have not seen them yet in the win now mode where they are set to acquire guys who are major league ready or are major leaguers. But I would say, I think that they have a two-pronged approach to addressing pitching in the long-term macro view. I think the first is to take a ton of swings on pitchers late in the draft like they did last year, guys who have traits, guys who are like a Carlos Tavera where they're a high spin rate, good alternate stuff, and they trust their system to develop those guys. So they say, we're going to take all the proven college bats that we can, or proven bats period that we can in the first 10 rounds. And then the last 10 rounds, we're going to just take swings. And it's like the 7th round of the NFL draft where you're taking this guy with crazy concerns. Maybe he's got 8 back surgeries, but he had that one good pro day. And you're just taking a huge swing on the guy because that there's not a great chance that he's going to be an NFL player. I think they view the last 10 rounds as a chance for you to take big swings, and you say, this guy's got something I can work with. This guy will get into our system. We'll get him into the lab at Wake Forest. We can work with that. And they see which one of those guys they can develop. And then the second prong of that is acquiring these guys via trade and free agency. It's why huge reason why we saw the left field wall being moved back, because the Orioles intend to address pitching and free agency over the next few years. It's what we saw with Houston when Mike Elias was there. What did they do? They grew their bats, and then they acquired arms. They acquired Garrett Cole. They acquired some of the best pitchers, Zach Greinke, some of the best pitchers in the game, Justin Verlander. None of those guys came up through their system, and all of them were huge players on teams that won pennants. So they intend, I think, to try to take swings on these pitchers late in the rounds, in later rounds of the draft. And then when they get good, they're going to have a huge depth of quality position players in their farm system with which to deal. And I think the hope is, by the time, the Orioles have all these picks on day one of the draft, maybe by the time these guys are in Double-A, the Orioles are so good that they're using these guys as trade pieces. I know that's weird to say because we've been in the draft and develop mode for so many years now, but given how fast this major league team is developing, you never know. Maybe the Orioles are competing for a wild card spot for, sooner than we think. And you look at the big league roster and you say, boy, there's really not enough room for these guys. That's okay. You can trade those guys to get a quality pitcher if that's where your team is lacking on the big league diamond. So it's a two-pronged approach, I think, that Mike Elias is taking here.
It makes a lot of sense because you take away so much of the variability of pitching on the draft, which is just so much hit or miss than hitting. It's just so much harder, especially if you're taking high school arms.
Yes.
I think they get a little bit lucky by the fact that the 2 guys that got picked before they got here are 2 high school arms that look like they're going to work out, knock on wood. So, but then you look at the rest of the organizational depth, and it's mostly position players. But yeah, you're right. I mean, in Houston, they were like, why would we swing for pitching when we can just go get guys that are proven already, and it's easier to build hitting in the draft. Yeah.
And you look at the added risk, I think, with pitchers is injury. I mean, usually position players are easily, you have instances where they go through some major surgery, some major injury, and they're never the same. But more often than not, when you talk about a career changing injury, you're talking about a pitcher. You're talking about a Tommy John surgery, a thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. So you have the added risk of injury at that level. And look at the variability of the arms from the last couple of drafts. I remember last year, there was a portion of the Orioles fan base that was saying, we need pitchers, got to take a pitcher at number 5. And they were saying, look at Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter. Well, guess what? Kumar Rocker ended up not being able to sign with the Mets, and he's back available in this draft. So the Orioles could, in theory, take him at number 33 if he's available. And look at Jack Leiter, who's got an ERA over 6 in Double-A, and everybody said that he was the next great pitching prospect, and he still has a ton of potential. But neither of those guys is a sure thing to be a big leaguer at some point soon. So it's a huge risk to take a pitcher, not just injury wise, but talent wise. It's hard to do unless you have that Steven Strasburg at the top of that draft that this guy's going to be an ace for years to come. it's just a hard risk to take. And I think that the Orioles probably view the difference between a first round position player and a 10th round position player. They think that difference is greater than a first round pitcher and a 10th round pitcher. Whereas they think, they're going to bet on the traits of a 10th round pitcher over, necessarily giving $8 million to a pitcher at the top of the draft and saddling him with being the face of their rotation for years to come.
And we talked about him a little, but again, the high school pitcher, DL Hall, awesome today. Again, is not as good as his last start, which is very hard to do, I think. And I can't believe that this is a real stat that he had 35 swing and misses his 2 starts ago. That seems unbelievable. Like I had to read that a couple of times to make sure I was reading it right. But over his last 3 starts, 15 2/3, 1 earned run, 7 walks, and 30 Ks.
Yeah.
I mean, when are we talking about DL Hall as a Baltimore Oriole, not a Norfolk Tide?
I think when the walk rate comes down, unfortunately, which it's still been relatively high, and it is still an issue for him, unfortunately. And for DL Hall, he's always been clear about it's not a command issue. It is a nibble issue. He's always trying to hunt. He's hunting the strikeouts, and boy, does it work when he is getting swing and misses. But at times you're getting a lot of guys who are laying off his stuff, and it's leading to some walks. And last time I checked, I think his walk rate is still over 5. It's still over 5 batters per 9. So that is what's leading to the inflated ERA. Unfortunately, it's what's leading to the shorter starts that we've seen from him. And while he's throwing a lot of pitches, like he threw in the 90s, 2 starts ago, he didn't get particularly deep into the game. And it's something that I think that the Orioles are still hoping to see from him. It feels a lot like the conversation that we were having in 2019 with Ryan Mountcastle, where you're saying this guy's hitting 312 at AAA Norfolk. He's got 25 bombs. He's got an OPS over 800. Or 900 at that point, whatever it was. What is stopping the Orioles from calling this guy up? And it was his walk rate. And if for him, a position player, the opposite side of the walk rate, he wasn't walking enough. And the Orioles were very patient, and they made sure that walk rate got a little bit higher. And then they called him up in 2020, and they worked with him, obviously, at the alternate site before they called him up. And we've still seen it be an issue for Ryan Mountcastle at times, where he's chased pitches that are ridiculously out of the zone, but he has learned to hone that in a little bit, and it's what's made him one of the best hitters on this team. So I think that it's still possible that he gets there by the end of the season. DL Hall does, but I think that the Orioles they're not going to call up a guy just to call him up, and certainly it would make the Orioles fan base very happy. And I think that day is coming soon. But until they see the necessary improvements from DL Hall that they are looking for specifically, they are still going to wait to pull the trigger on Hall.
Oh, I'm going to get you out of here on a little rapid fire.
Okay.
Who does Mike Elias take with the first pick?
Right now, I say Tamar Johnson.
Who does Paul Mancano take with the first pick?
Probably right now, I say Drew Jones, but it's this close.
Will this guy be on the team after the trade deadline or not be on the team after the trade deadline? Trey Mancini.
No.
Jorge Mateo.
Yes.
Anthony Santander.
Yes.
Jorge Lopez.
Yes.
You got anybody else, RDT?
I was trying to think of a Bobby Abreu question, but I got nothing.
I was trying to think of another player they could trade.
Hopefully
Anybody
I'm not
that
traded. You never know.
Yeah, well, that's what I say. Is Paul Mancano still working for MASN after the trade?
I was gonna say you're the Trey Mancini of MASN, so it's like,
you might have to go with them.
About?
You might have to
Yeah.
if they trade him to the Cardinals. You might have to just head over to St. Louis, and we'll bring you back next year.
Honestly, yeah. Exactly. I'm on an expiring contract, if you will.
Plug all the MASN things, all the social you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at MASN Orioles is where you can find our social. And then we've got the MASN All Access podcast, which we are doing special draft episodes leading up to the draft. We're going to do a draft night show that's going to be Sunday night. We're going to have Mike Elias join us shortly after the first overall pick. Some exciting other guests joining us. So tune in on YouTube, Facebook, anywhere that you can tune in. I think those are the only two. And on the MASN app, and watch our draft show and listen to the MASN All Access podcast.
I will be in the comments yet again for another number one pick.
Will you be crying in the club? Is my question.
Yeah, I mean, probably. It just depends.
Yeah, who do you want? Who are you throwing? So RDT, every year you throw your weight behind somebody. Who's your guy this year?
I was big on Green early.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, you were like in Green.
I was
on
big
Green's
on
Instagram when he
Green.
was like 15. So
yeah. I DM'd a couple of them today. Have not got any responses.
Asking for if they like crab cakes. Is that what you're
I
doing?
just said crab cakes to Drew Jones?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Eric invented that move, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it was apparently the first one. I don't know. I mean, again, I'm in that same boat where I'm like, I would love Drew Jones. I think it would be fun, but like, again, what's the timeline on him? What are we going to see him in 3 or 4 years? That's another thing. I don't know. I have no idea. I can be swayed any which way. My love can be bought, or that's probably not the word I should use. Talking about high school boys.
Yeah.
We can edit that
Wow.
out.
Wow.
I don't know
I
how to
hope your
word
wife
that
does not hear
without.
that.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
not-
I was gonna say.
I don't know how to word this without ending up behind.
Yeah,
bars.
RDT is sweating. It
So,
as we
yeah.
down to.
We'll just hit the roll on to the next one. I got nothing.
It sounds like RDT you need to listen to the MASN All Access draft preview shows to figure out who you want. That's what it
Yeah.
sounds
Go.
like.
There we go.
Exactly.
Paul
Great
Mancano,
plug.
thanks for joining us, man. Very much appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.